Varen never imagined that a simple message would change the course of his life. The sleek, black holoscreen flickered as he read the official transmission from the Galactic Council, his stomach tightening with each word. Subject: Inheritance of House Rixol, urgent compliance required. He leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the edge of his desk. Inheritance? That made no sense. Rixol, his old friend, had been a decorated war hero, a noble of the Zalari, and one of the few non-humans Varen had ever considered family. But an inheritance suggested something far more personal. With a swipe of his hand, the hollow message expanded, and he read further. As per Zalari customary law, the designated inheritor of a noble's lineage is responsible for all dependents and marital duties. With the passing of Rixol of House Seraxis, you, Varen Kane, are hereby bound by contract to assume guardianship and marital obligations to his daughters, Isiris and Vayani. Failure to comply will result in exile and the dissolution of their noble standing. His heart pounded. Guardianship? Marital obligations? This had to be a mistake. Before he could process the information, a soft chime echoed through his apartment. The security panel displayed an official insignia, the crest of the Zalari consulate. With a heavy breath, he pressed the door release. Two Zalari officials stepped inside, clad in deep blue robes with silver embroidery marking their rank. Behind them, a tall, imposing figure followed. A man Varen recognized immediately. High Chancellor Tyvos. The elder Zalari's piercing, indigo eyes studied him, unreadable yet firm. Varen Kane, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Your presence is required at the consulate. The matter of House Seraxis cannot wait. Varen had questions, 1,000 of them, but he knew better than to argue with a Zalari summons. As they left his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far greater than he had ever anticipated. The Zalari consulate was a marvel of alien architecture, towering above the Terran intergalactic district with its smooth, silver curves and glowing energy conduits. Varen had been here before, once as a guest of Rixol, long before the war had ended. Now he entered as a man bound by a law he barely understood. Inside, the air was warm, scented with the faint fragrance of Lumis flowers, Zalari blooms that carried traces of their species' bioenergy. Every surface pulsed with a quiet hum, as if the building itself were alive. The chamber where they led him was vast, its ceilings high and adorned with celestial maps of the known universe. At the center stood a circular platform where Isiris and Vayani awaited him. The sight of them stole his breath. Isiris, the elder of the two, stood with an air of regal confidence. Her violet eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto him the moment he entered. She was tall, her cerulean skin shimmering beneath the dim golden lights, the bioluminescent markings across her arms glowing faintly with restrained emotion. Vayani, younger and softer in demeanor, stood slightly behind her sister. She was delicate where Isiris was fierce, with long silver-white hair cascading down her back, her golden markings more subdued. Her gaze, unlike Isiris's piercing scrutiny, was hesitant, uncertain. Varen swallowed hard. The last time he had seen them, they had been children, just glimpses during his visits with Rixol. Now they were standing before him as his intended. Varen, Isiris spoke first, her voice smooth, almost melodic. We did not expect you to come. I didn't have a choice, he admitted. The council's message made that clear. Tyvos stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. You misunderstand, human. This is not a punishment. It is an honor. Varen turned to him, his jaw tight. Honor? Rixol was my friend. I would have done anything for him. But this, he gestured toward Isiris and Vayani. This is marriage, not military duty. It is both, Tyvos said gravely. The House of Seraxis is one of the few remaining noble bloodlines of the Zalari. Rixol's daughters are unbonded, and without a mate of equal standing, they will be stripped of their titles and exiled. This is our way. Varen ran a hand through his dark hair. And why me? I'm human. I have no claim to your noble houses. Osiris's expression remained unreadable, but it was Vayani who finally spoke. "Because my father chose you." Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, but it held a quiet conviction that cut through Varen's resistance. "He named you as our guardian," she continued, "as the only one he trusted to protect us." Varen exhaled sharply. He had fought beside Rixal for years, bled with him, nearly died at his side. If Rixal had truly made this decision, it wasn't one made lightly. "Tell me the truth," Varen said, his gaze moving between the two sisters. "Do you want this?" A long silence followed. Osiris was the first to answer. "What we want does not matter. Duty does." Vayani, however, hesitated. "I do not know you," she admitted. "Not the way my father did. But I would rather be bound to someone he trusted than to a stranger." Varen let out a slow breath. The weight of their words settled deep in his chest. Duty, honor, protection. These were things he understood. But marriage? That was something he had never considered, let alone with two alien women whose customs were as unfamiliar as the stars themselves. And yet he couldn't turn away. Not when Rixal had placed his faith in him. "I need time," he finally said, "to understand your customs, to know what this bond truly means." Tyvos nodded approvingly. "Then it is decided. You will reside with them, learn their ways. And when the time comes, you will choose." Varen met Osiris's gaze, then Vayani's. This wasn't just a choice between obligation and freedom. It was the beginning of something far greater than himself. And somehow he knew his fate was now entwined with theirs. Forever. Varen had never lived with anyone outside of military quarters, let alone two alien women bound to him by an interstellar law he barely understood. The arrangement felt surreal. He had expected formalities, distance, perhaps resentment. Instead, he found himself woven into their daily lives as if he had always belonged. The Zalari dwelling assigned to them was an architectural marvel, organic, fluid, almost alive. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, responding to their movements, adjusting temperature and lighting based on their presence. Every morning, Varen awoke to the soft hum of the dwelling syncing with their biosignatures, a subtle reminder that he was no longer alone. The first few days passed in tense politeness. Osiris was direct, disciplined. She treated him like a soldier learning a new battlefield, her every interaction efficient and deliberate. She corrected his misunderstandings about Zalari customs, guided him through the household's energy-based systems, and ensured he knew his responsibilities. Vayani, in contrast, remained reserved. She observed more than she spoke, her silver eyes flickering with curiosity whenever he struggled to adapt. She never corrected him, never intervened, only watched, as if trying to piece together the kind of man he was. By the end of the first week, Varen had learned several important things. First, Zalari food was unlike anything he had ever tasted. Their meals were composed of etherfruit, star grains, and essence-infused teas that enhanced their biofields. While humans relied on physical sustenance, the Zalari absorbed nutrients through both ingestion and energy exchange. Varen found himself adapting to their lighter diet, though the first time he consumed an etherfruit, the rush of warmth through his bloodstream left him momentarily dizzy. Second, personal space was a flexible concept. The Zalari communicated emotions through touch. A simple graze of fingertips was more than physical. It was an exchange of intent. This was why, despite their reserved nature, Osiris and Vayani occasionally brushed against him, their fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. Each touch carried a silent message: acknowledgement, curiosity, uncertainty. And third, bonding was not just a choice. It was an inevitability. One evening, Varen sat in the dwelling's central chamber, watching as Osiris ran her hands over a glowing panel, adjusting the structure's resonance field. The energy pulsed in response, shifting the air around them. "You are still hesitant," she said, without turning to look at him. Varen exhaled. "I don't know what's expected of me." Osiris finally turned, her violet eyes narrowing. "You were a warrior. You understand duty. This isn't war." "No, but it is survival. For us." Her words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Vayani, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Do you wish to leave?" Varen glanced at her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something vulnerable in the way she held herself. Fingers curled slightly, as if bracing for his answer. "No," he said after a pause. "But that doesn't mean I understand what's happening." Osiris studied him, then gestured for him to follow. "Then let me show you." She led him to a separate chamber, dimly lit, its walls lined with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly. At the center of the room was a resonance pool, a shallow basin of luminescent liquid that shifted with unseen energy. "This is the first trial of bonding," Osiris explained. "The unveiling." Varen frowned. "You said bonding wasn't a choice." "It isn't," she admitted. "But it is a process. You must know us. We must know you. And only through the unveiling can we truly understand what we are to each other." Vayani stepped forward, kneeling beside the pool. "It will not harm you. It only reveals what we already feel." Varen hesitated. He had faced battlefields, seen horrors beyond human comprehension. And yet, the thought of exposing his mind to these two women, letting them see his truth, made his pulse quicken. Still, he knelt beside them. Osiris extended her hand first. "Do you trust us?" Varen met her gaze. "I trusted your father with my life." "That is not the same." But he took her hand anyway. And then, with a deep breath, Vayani placed her hand over his. The resonance pool surged, and the world around them vanished. Varen was no longer in the chamber. He was standing on a battlefield, smoke rising in thick columns as the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the air. He knew this place, the siege of Draken's Maw. Osiris and Vayani stood beside him, their eyes wide as they saw the chaos unfold. "This is your memory," Osiris murmured. Varen swallowed hard. "This is where I met your father." They watched as the scene played out. Varen, wounded, pinned behind the remains of a crashed fighter, struggling to hold his ground as enemy forces closed in. Then, a towering figure emerged from the fire. "Rixal." Vayani gasped softly. "Father!" They watched as Rixal lifted Varen effortlessly, shielding him with his own body. The Zalari warrior hadn't needed to save him, but he did, without hesitation. The scene shifted. Another memory. Varen, laughing with Rixal over drinks in a dimly lit cantina. Varen sparring with him in the training halls of the Terran Zalari Alliance. Varen, kneeling beside his friend's dying body, blood pooling beneath him as Rixal gripped his hand. "Take care of them," the alien warrior whispered with his final breath. The vision shattered. Varen gasped as he returned to reality, the resonance pool's glow dimming. His chest ached as he looked at Osiris and Vayani, both of whom had tears glistening in their eyes. Osiris spoke first, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "You loved him," Varen exhaled. "He was my brother." Vayani wiped her eyes, her fingers trembling. "I never saw how he died." "He fought until his last breath," Varen said softly. "He never wavered." A silence stretched between them, but something had changed. There was no more distance, no more uncertainty. They had seen him as he was, and he had seen them, the daughters left behind, bound to a stranger by duty, yet longing for something deeper. Osiris reached for his hand again, this time without hesitation. "We are not just bound by law, Varen. We are bound by his will." Vayani nodded, her silver eyes searching his face. "And by choice, if we let it be." Varen tightened his grip on their hands. For the first time, the idea of this bond did not feel like an obligation. Felt like destiny. The days that followed the unveiling were unlike anything Varen had experienced before. The bond between him and the sisters was no longer a distant concept. It was real, tangible, something he could feel in the quiet moments between them. It started with small things. The way Osiris no longer corrected him with sharp precision but with soft amusement when he mispronounced a Zalari phrase. How Vayani, once hesitant to speak, now sought him out in the evenings, asking quiet questions about his past, his childhood, his life before war. And then there were the touches. The casual brush of Osiris's fingers against his as they worked side by side in the dwelling's central chamber. The lingering warmth of Vayani's presence when she sat close to him in the evenings, her silver hair catching the glow of the dwelling's soft lights. It was dangerous how natural it was becoming. One evening, under the twin moons, Varen found himself outside, gazing at the distant stars. The night air was warm, carrying the faint scent of luma blossoms, a flower native to Zalari homeworlds. "You are thinking too much." He turned. Osiris stood beside him, her arms crossed, violet eyes studying him with that sharp intensity he was beginning to crave. "I do that a lot," he admitted. She let out a quiet breath, stepping closer. "What do you fear?" Varen hesitated. "That I'm not what you need." She frowned. "You are." He shook his head. "You don't know that." Her gaze softened. "I do. Because I have seen you." She reached for him, her fingers tracing the scar along his forearm, the one he had earned in the war. "I saw what you sacrificed for my father, what you risked for those who could not protect themselves. That is who you are." Varen swallowed. "And what if I fail you?" Osiris tilted her head slightly. "Then we will fail together." For the first time, he didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with something unspoken. And then she closed the distance. It was not a hesitant thing. Osiris did nothing without certainty, and this was no different. Her lips pressed against his, warm, electric, the energy of her markings pulsing faintly as her emotions surged through her skin. Varen stiffened for only a moment before instinct took over. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, feeling the steady thrum of her energy against his own. When she pulled away, her gaze was unreadable. That was unexpected. Varen exhaled a quiet laugh. "For you or for me?" Her lips curved slightly. "Both." A soft sound behind them made them turn. Vayani stood near the dwelling's entrance, her silver eyes wide. For a moment, she simply stared. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared inside. Varen's stomach tightened. "I should go," Osiris said softly. He didn't waste another second. Inside, the dwelling was dimly lit, the soft hum of its energy quieter than usual. Vayani stood near the central chamber, her hands gripping the fabric of her tunic. "Vayani." She didn't turn. "I shouldn't have watched." Varen took a slow breath. "You weren't intruding." Her shoulders tensed. "She is stronger than me, braver." I thought if I stayed silent, I could pretend I did not feel it too. His heart pounded. "Feel what?" Finally, she turned. There was uncertainty in her gaze, but beneath it, something deeper. "I have never known another the way the bond demands," she admitted. "I have never wanted to." She hesitated, then whispered, "Until now." Varen stepped forward, carefully, deliberately. "Then show me." She hesitated only a moment before closing the space between them. Unlike Osiris, her touch was hesitant, as if testing the reality of the moment. But when Varen's fingers brushed against her markings, a shiver ran through her, and she melted against him. It was softer, slower, a quiet unraveling of the tension that had built between them. When they finally pulled apart, Vayani let out a breath she had been holding. "I was afraid," she admitted. Varen tucked a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "Of what?" "That you would not want me the way you want her." His chest ached at the vulnerability in her voice. "I want both of you." Vayani searched his face for any hesitation. When she found none, she smiled, small, real, hopeful. And for the first time since this all began, Varen knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Varen had always believed love was something slow, something earned over years of shared moments. But with Osiris and Vayani, it was different. It was like gravity, an undeniable force that had pulled them together long before any of them had realized it. It wasn't just about obligation anymore. It was choice. The days after their confessions passed in a quiet, simmering tension. Not the kind born from uncertainty, but from something deeper, awareness. Every glance held unspoken meaning. Every touch lingered just a little longer than before. Varen was no longer just living in the dwelling. He was becoming part of it. One evening, as the glow of Zalari dusk filtered through the chamber, Osiris stood before him, arms crossed, studying him with that unreadable expression he was beginning to understand as carefully concealed affection. "You are restless," she observed. Varen exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know how to do this." She arched a brow. "Do what?" "This. The bond. I've spent my whole life fighting, not building something like this." Osiris stepped closer. "Then learn." It was such a simple answer, but it settled something in his chest. Before he could respond, Vayani appeared from the adjoining chamber, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her expression softer than usual. "The council has sent a summons," she said quietly. Varen's jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come, the final confirmation, the moment where the choice would become law. The council chamber was nothing like the dwelling. It was vast, cold, unforgiving. At the center stood High Chancellor Tivos, flanked by the elders of the Zalari nobility. The moment Varen, Osiris, and Vayani entered, the murmurs began. "A human? Bound to House Seraxis. It is unprecedented. The council must intervene." Silence. Tivos's voice cut through the chamber, and all fell still. His gaze settled on Varen, unreadable. "You have lived among them. You have walked the path set before you. Now the question remains, do you accept the bond?" The weight of 100 expectations settled on Varen's shoulders. He turned to Osiris, to Vayani. He saw the strength in Osiris's stance, the quiet hope in Vayani's gaze. He saw home, and suddenly the answer was the easiest one he had ever given. "Yes." A soft gasp rippled through the chamber. Tivos studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let it be written. House Seraxis endures." The ceremony that followed was not elaborate, not by human standards. But for the Zalari it was sacred. The final step of the bond required unity, not just in word, but in essence. In the heart of the council chamber stood an ancient artifact known as the Celestine Prism. A relic that held the energy of the ancestors. It would recognize and solidify the bond if it was true. Varen stepped forward first, placing his palm against the prism's surface. It was cold, then warm, then alive, as if it were breathing. Osiris joined him, her markings flaring with energy as she touched the prism beside him. Then Vayani, her hand resting over his. The prism pulsed, the chamber filled with a soft hum. And then light, golden, radiant, consuming, passed through them, into them, around them, knitting their energies together in a way that was irrevocable. When it faded, Varen felt it. Something new, something whole. He turned to Osiris, then to Vayani. They felt it too. They were bound. Not by duty, not by law, but by love. And for the first time in his life, Varen knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Forever.